Yeah. Okay, hello and welcome. So today is the Serendipitous Saturdays here at Code Mentoring, and it's been decided as a group we're going to jump into testing. So using Jest to test an API, a RESTful API. We're not going to look into GraphQL today. So for the first part of what I'm going to do in this webinar is very quickly run through building out an API in Express. It's not going to be the focus, so if you're a little bit confused by that, don't worry. It's not the purpose of today's webinar. And then we'll jump into how we test that using things like Jest, maybe super test in combination with Jest, collecting coverage, and a few other best practices like that. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my code editor. As always, I encourage you guys to code along. I'm just going to close some of these windows down because I've got too many of them. There we go, a little bit cleaner. All right, zoom in. Open up a new folder. Call this Jest Express.
It just needs to be presented. Can you see here?
I'm not presenting it.
Yeah,
Apologies,
okay.
I always forget that step. Make for a very boring webinar, wouldn't it? Try and guess what code I'm writing today. Interpretive code with Tristan. All right, you guys can see this?
Yeah, all good now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am going to run through some of the concepts here. So I apologize if it's a little bit rushed on the Express side. It's not a priority. You don't need to know this. The principles that you learn today can be applied to a Django API. They can be applied to a .NET API. They can be applied to anything that is a standard REST, a standard RESTful API. So don't worry if the Node.js thing is a little bit over your head. Okay. So first things first is we're going to install Express. So I'm going to go yarn init -y for just to skip through all the questions. Yarn add Express. Go through and do its magic. Create a source folder, index.js. We're not going to focus on TypeScript today. We go const express equals require express. Right, const app equals express. And don't worry if I'm typing too fast. I'll periodically put this up on GitHub so you guys can clone this stuff down. All right, so app.listen, process.env, port, otherwise use 9999. Log port equals port. Server listing on localhost. Port. Okay, so that will actually start our little API for us. All right. So I'll just leave that up for a second so you guys can see that code. And then in the meantime, I'm going to create a little script for us. Call this start. Node source index.js. So if we go now on dev, or if you're running npm, you go npm start or npm run dev. Right, that should now start a little API for us. So this is going to be what we're testing. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and open up, say, our routes, to users.js. Module.exports equals new router. This const router equals require express.router. This does it require new? Pretty sure it requires new. Give me a sec. The cat is meowing. Let him out. Come on. Very needy animals, cats, especially when one is trying to run a webinar. All right. So here we're going to go router.use get in this case. I wonder why that's not. Let me just fiddle with this. Router. Maybe it requires a capital R. Fire express. This is capital R. Okay. Why that's not coming through is there we go. Okay, great. Always forget the exact syntax for that. Okay, so a router is just going to allow us to put certain REST calls on it, and now we're exporting it. And then in our index, we can import that. So we can go const user router equals require. Here, go to routes, users.js, go app.use user router. It's now going to connect these two files together. Just put that on the other side here so you guys can see both. Okay, so let's just say /users. Right. Now, for those who know Express, what's the three things that we take in Express middleware? There's a quiz.
Request, response, next.
You were cheating, weren't you? You're reading this.
Yeah, I'm Googling it. Yeah.
Rude. All right. So, in fact, in this case, we're not going to use the next. We're not going to really use much middleware for this. Just going to keep it very simple. Okay, so users. Let's just generate some users. Const users equals say name. Bob Marley. Age. Say 40. Right, profession. Position. We've also got Bruce Wayne, age 30, profession, millionaire. Okay, we'll just keep it simple for now. And then we'll go here, we'll simply just go response.send JSON users. Right, so we're not gonna do anything fancy with this. This is our pretend database. This part here. Right. And then we'll restart our server. And then if we load up localhost 9999, go to users. There we go. So we've got some JSON just sitting here for us, ready to go. Okay, so that's. I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm going to put this on GitHub. So we're going to have a git ignore. Logs.ds store for Mac and also node modules. Okay, and then we'll go git init. Again, if any of this is a little bit confusing or a little bit too rushed, don't worry. This is not really the focus of today. The focus is really what we're about to get into. Going to GitHub, create a new repository. Call this webinar Express or Jest Express. A showcase for testing Express REST API. in Jest. Okay. So go ahead and go git remote add origin. And there we go. So git push. We'll do that upstream. And then that should be ready to go for you guys. So here is that link. Paste that here. There you go. Also, while you guys are copying that code, I'm going to choose a little bit of music. Feeling in the mood for something. So any questions on anything we've just covered so far on how that worked? All right, so we have basic little Express server running on port 9999. We've connected up this router. And that router is just we're just going to use this JSON object to kind of maintain our state. So let's do a post as well. Actually, you know what? Let's leave that for a second. Let's stick to the original plan. Okay, so how do we actually we've got this working? So this looks fine here. So these users are coming through. You can see this. So that's exactly what we're returning in this users object. So how do we test this? What's the first step, do we think? How do we approach testing as a concept? Take a step backwards for a second and forget about the technologies that we're going to use. What's the process that we're going to go through as a team in testing? For those who have tested before, right, what would you do in this situation?
First, try to understand like what's the expected output,
right?
What's the expected input, right? And look for the vulnerabilities in that. The
vulnerabilities, yeah, and how.
Yeah.
So we want to test that it works firstly. So we have a successful test case, and then we also want to test, as you're saying, the vulnerabilities. We want to test if we can break it somehow. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So in this case, right, are we sending any information?
We are receiving right now.
We're receiving right now. There's no sending yet. So we'll get to that. But let's keep it simple for now. So in this case, right, we want to test that we're getting back the correct data. So I'm actually going to go ahead and export this. The reason why we're exporting this is so that we can actually import this in our tests. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and create a tests directory. So this is where all of your tests will live. Some people like to have it next to it, so they have users.spec.js, and they'd actually have it sitting right next to the file. Right? Personally, I don't like that approach. I like having them separate. But there's no right or wrong way with this. So I'm going to go users.test.js. So this will correlate to this part here. Okay, so to get this working, I'm going to install two things. I'm going to go yarn add dev, right? So yarn add -d for dev dependencies. I'm going to install Jest. I'm also going to install super test. So Jest is a really great library for doing calls to APIs over the wire. It has a whole bunch of really nice built-in functionality that plays really nicely with Jest. So I'm going to go const supertest equals require. Now, how do we write a test? What's the high-level syntax or concepts when we're writing a test?
Like you are supposed to have like a test suite.
a test suite.
Which will hold our test cases, basically.
Test cases, test suite. Right. I'm assuming it's not a lolly. Well, you don't call them lollies here. You call them, what do you call them? Candy. We call lollies in Australia. A test lolly. There. So what is that? Right. What is a test suite? Well, thankfully, the testing community, the testing language, has kind of taken this approach of a really high level approach to its language. So it uses it reads like English. For example, right, we very typically wrap a lot of our functionality in something called a describe. So here you're saying describe the name of the group, right? So the group of tests. So in this case, we're testing the get/users. Right, so everything inside here is going to pertain to that particular endpoint. This one here. Right, later on, we might have another one, which is post/users, and we'll run this when we're testing adding information. Right, we'll test this part, and then of course the file is related to that resource or that entity if you're coming from a GraphQL perspective. Okay, so any questions on how describe works? You've got describe, we have a name, and you'll see how this pertains to the output in a second. And then we have our content, that's actually a function. All right. So I'm going to comment this one out for now. Now, for those who don't know about Jest, you can actually do .skip. So it's going to skip that output. And you can also do, if you just want to test one thing, you can go .only. If you have many different test suites and you just want to test this one here, but you don't want to have to comment the other ones out, you can run the .only and it will actually run only this one. And if you have multiple, it will run 2 and it will skip this one. It will only run these ones. That's just a little Jest syntax for you. It's kind of fun. For now, we're going to use the skip. Okay, so we've got describe. Now we have a very similar concept called it. Now the way I like to use this is I use it in plain English. So it should. So it actually reads like a sentence. So it should return correct list of users. So this is really testing a specific edge case or a specific pathway that we can go down. Right? If you imagine programming as a big tree of options, you start somewhere, the program starts, and then as you move through the program, you keep branching off into all these different possible timelines. Right? I'm actually going to draw this because I feel like it's very analogous to how we want to approach testing. Right? If that's okay with you guys, because I feel like it's useful. And I've never thought about it from this perspective before, but I think it really is a good way to, as a metaphor, to describe it. So if we start here, right? This is the program start. We start here, then maybe something happens. Maybe the port, right? The port that you want to run your server on is already taken. So this is one option, and this is another option. So in this case, it might be port taken. Remember in our API, how we have this process.env.port. Let's say we pass in a port that's already in use, right? We want to handle this somehow. So this is an edge case. The other one is that it's successful. Right, successfully starts API. So this is just starting out, right? Now you might decide that this is an edge case that you want to test. In which case, you write test case. You might have something like it should successfully start API. Have your things in here, and then you might also test it should gracefully fail or warn on port and used port. So that's going to handle this one, and it's going to handle this one, and then you obviously put your code inside these 3 dots to run that to create this edge case. So it would start in each of these test cases, it would start from scratch. So you'd start here, then you get to this, and you would hope that this happens, right? And if that doesn't happen, then that test fails and something's wrong. Something's wrong in your code because this should happen. And then in the other case, right, should gracefully fail / warn on use port. So you manually inside here, inside this last one, you create a situation in which this breaks, and you want to handle how it breaks, right? And if it doesn't break, then there's something wrong. So there's something that you've changed somewhere in your code has changed the nature of how these two cases operate, right? So you've got to be careful, and that's why it's useful to have so many cases written for your code, because it goes through every single possible tree, right? So if we create more situations, right? So it's connecting to the database, right? We want to have a failed connection and a successful connection, and then you want to have something else like this is just the API starting up, right? This isn't even testing the API for using it, right? You might have this, and then you might have something else where this fails with a different types of errors, and you want to handle how these errors happen, right? So this fails because of the wrong username. This fails because of the wrong password to the database. This fails because of it can't connect to the database, right? You're offline. This handles the wrong database name, right? All these different database connection, right? So all these different edge cases, you want to test these, right? That comes off from here. And then this is, say, successful, right? Say bad database connection, right? And this might say database connected, successful, good database connection, right? Now you guys are kind of getting the picture, right? So each of these circles is an event. It's something that you want to happen. Now it could be a good event, right? Like this one, right? Or it could be a bad event in that you want it to be something that you want to test for something that's broken, and you want to test for how it's broken, right? Sorry for the horrible colors. So this is really the approach to testing and how we want to, and then all of this, right? So if I was to grab a pencil, so all of this, right? This might be your database file, right? Database.test.ts. And then you might have this down here. This becomes your API or maybe your server .test, right? So you're starting to see how these things get grouped together. Right, now this inside here might be an individual describe. Right? It should fail as expected, right? This in here might be describe handle failures. So on and so forth. And then each of these circles would be an individual it. It should, right? Right, this might be a successful one. Describe, and you get the point, right? Successful connection. Right. So I'm just realizing this is a pretty good way of writing this out and thinking about this conceptually. Does this kind of make sense? How this tree works and how we're dividing up branches of the trees into different parts. Just keep in mind, like this is going to continue off into a whole bunch of other stuff, right? We want to test, and this just gets more and more complex, and it gets larger and larger, and it comes out here, and you've got all these different edge cases, and it just grows into this big tree. You start from something very small, and then it just grows as the complexity increases. Right? You want to grow all the different edge cases that you target. So, does anybody have any questions on how we're approaching the testing mindset? Does anybody disagree with this? No, actually, I don't think we should approach it this way. Curious to know what you guys think.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is the syntax for using describe and it, is that specific to the Jest framework?
No. So that's pretty common. I think it comes from Chai. I think was one of the. So Jest came about because there were so many, and there are so many different testing frameworks for JavaScript. It's ridiculous. It is actually ridiculous. And Jest came along and tried to be the one ring to rule them all. And in the darkness bind them, because it's Facebook. So it kind of drew from a lot of the syntax that was around, and it really is this high level approach, this English, read it as English approach. Now, obviously, inside the three dots to generate this example, that's real code, but the actual test cases themselves, that's not specific to Jest. And I can't speak for other languages. I think it's Maven for Java. I don't know what Maven is like. I know PHP has its own stuff as well. So yeah.
Java, you have JUnit.
JUnit is another one.
JUnit, yeah.
Yep. So I don't know what JUnit looks like. Might be a little bit more analytical than this, but that's kind of the approach to how we're going to test. So cool. I'm gonna go ahead and write some tests. So we've got the describe users. We've got the it should return correct list of users. So let's try this. So how do we test this? Well, this is where super test comes in. So in super test, let's look at the API for super test. So you may pass a HTTP server or a function to request. Right? So in this case, we're going to export our app. This here. And we're actually going to test this Express API. So we have an Express just like they've got. All right, so express.get. So we've set up a route very similar to what we're doing, almost identical actually. And then we pass this in. So request is the super test, and it takes this Express app, and then you run .get. So this is going to call this little route that we've got here, this little endpoint. And then we can start doing some testing on it. Expect. So we're expecting it to come back with a JSON, right? We're expecting it to come back with 15 characters. We're expecting it to come back with a response of 200. Right, and we can handle some errors if we need to. So that's one way to do it. What are some other ways? I believe you can do it with passing different something else. Let's just stick with this for now. I think that'll work pretty well. Right. So are there any questions on this part here, on what we're about to do? All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we have to import our app. So const app equals require source index. Okay. So we now have our Express app that we've imported, like this. And then we might also export a start command. So const start. That way we can manually, we might even pass the port in like this. Port equals to allow us to pass that port in. Okay, so what we also want to do is so that we can start to, this is a Node.js trick. So if I run node source index, it's not gonna actually start our API. Exports.start. Just gonna fix this up. So this is a on here. I'll expect token export. Why is that not working? Module.exports.users. App is not defined. Is that? So how if I run this, this is not running anymore because we don't have this start. We're not calling the start command, right? But if I call the start, it'll work. Modules.exports.start. But what if we want to import the? This is being annoying. Let's return this app instead. We've got this little function. So if we call the start, it works. But what if we want to import it here but not run the server straight away? Because by virtue of importing this file, we instantly run it. So does anybody know how to turn this around so that if we call it from Node, it runs it, but if we import it, it doesn't run it? This is not specific to Node.js. Python has this. Other files have this. Does anybody know how to fix this problem? All right, it's a bit of a Node.js trick. So we can actually go if, right? We can go require.main equals process.main module. Now what this says is is this called directly? Is this file called directly from the CLI or from the command line? If it is, right, run it like this when we call it. But if it's not, if we're importing it like this, right, we don't want to run this straight away. We want to manually handle that ourselves. So that's a neat little trick. Python has some similar stuff. Other languages have their own versions of this. So that's just a little Node.js trick for you. There, I'll post that code up. Actually, I'll post this file up that I've got so far. Right here. There you go. Okay, so in here, right, we're going to have start. So Jest allows you to do something pretty nice. Let's say have let app. Now, what we can do in Jest is we can have this thing called before. Right, so you have things like before all. You also have before each. You have after all and after each. Just doing some funny stuff. So, and you can put this inside the global file. You can also put this inside individual describes as well. So if we have multiple test cases, in each of these, I can go before each and run some function. So every time it'll do this, then it will call this function. Then it will call this, then it will call this function. Then it will call this, then it will call this function. All right, before all, right, calls this one first, then it goes through. So depending on what level you run this at, whether it's the global or whether it's inside a specific describe. Now this is useful because what it allows us to do is set up or reset or initialize things, or it's a very powerful, this is a very powerful tool that you can use inside your Jest. So I highly recommend looking into that. In our case, we're going to go before all, and we want to set up our app. And here we're going to go app equals start. We're going to call that. So start, as we know, is going to return an express API. Right. Then we're also going to set up our super test. So let request. We're going to go request equals super test. So now, if I remove these, go request, and we can pass in some options. So we can go request dot, let's have a look at their exact API. Request dot get user / users. So let's see what this comes back with. Const users equals. We'll make this async. Wait it. Okay, so how do we run this? All right, we'll also log it. How do we run this this test file? Right. That's really where Jest is also our friend, in that it's also a test runner. It's not just a way of writing tests, but Jest also allows you to run those tests. So Jest really is a combination of lots of different technologies bundled together. All right. So if we go into our package.json, we add a test command, yarn test. Very simple. Yarn test. Oops, sorry. First yarn jest. Yarn test. It's going to run our jest command. Now it's automatically, look at that, it's automatically picked up our, just going to scroll up through this. All right, so it's automatically picked up our file under tests. And look at this. So we're seeing how it's breaking up. I'm going to move this over to the right. We've lost it. That's annoying. Let's go remove that console log for a second, just so we can see the output. Okay. So it's automatically picked up our test. Right, we've got a nice big green badge saying it's passed. What does that mean, passed? Well, it means that it's behaving as we should. If we go back to our tree, right, it means that the successful tests or the successful cases have succeeded, and it also means that the bad cases have failed in a way that we would expect. So that's what a pass means. It means that it's doing what we expect, which is good. So you see here how it's broken this up. So get/users is this test case, and we've got a green tick that told us how long it took, 24 milliseconds. Right, for this particular test case. And we also get this console log at the end. Right? So that console log is happening from our API. Now you'll notice that it hasn't finished. You've got this weird error message. Anybody know what this means? Can anybody decipher this?
Was it the server? You didn't stop the server?
I haven't stopped the server. So this process is actually still running. It hasn't finished. So how do we think we would do that?
Is there maybe there's like an after all, and then you have app.stop?
Precisely what we're going to do. So we learned about before all. Now we're going to use the after all that we learned a little bit about earlier. We're going to go app.close. Close. Let's try this. Runs through the tests. It's not a function. Is it stop? Maybe it's kill. Get the exact. Right. Stop. Close. Why is that? Always forget the exact syntax for this. Just looking through their API. People stop express. But we might have to expose the HTTP server. Yeah, okay. Server equals app.listen. Then we have this callback function. Okay. So we're going to modify our API just a little bit. So instead of returning this app, all right, we're actually going to return a promise. Return await new promise. And in here, once I'm going to go app.listen. And once this has been called, we're going to return this, and then we're going to go response. Again, sorry, this is going to be the server. This is going to return the server instead. Right. So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, just a bit of Node.js code. I think we should be able to do app.close from here. Yeah. App.close. Let's try that again. Async. Wait. I'll push all of this code up in a second so you guys can get on the same page. Still not working. Why is this not... So returning this, that should be working. Let's do some console logs. Log app. Yeah, undefined. So it seems that there's a bit of a race condition happening between all of this. Try this. Okay, I think for now let's leave this. We'll fix that bug later. I want to go ahead with actually getting the testing working. Now we'll just do Control C to okay, this is all broken now. Okay, that's fine. Just go back to what we had. Okay. Cool. So we'll fix all that up a little bit later. For now, let's go ahead and really knuckle down on how we want to test this. So we mentioned before about successful and unsuccessful. I think Rajat was talking about vulnerabilities, making sure we have the correct input and output. So in this case, we want to make sure that we're having the right output. So let's import our database or our pretend data. Right. Users equals require. Oh, I mentioned I was going to put this on Hub as well. Do that now. Feature added. That is up on GitHub if you would like to copy. So const users equals require. Source routes users this. So what we're trying to do is get these objects, right, explicitly. In a real production environment, there's so many different ways you could do this. You might decide to spin up a test database and actually interface directly to the database adapter and run the same queries that you're running in your controllers, for example. In this case, we're just going to interface directly to that object. Keep it simple. Maybe response. So let's log this response. Let's see what we're getting back from this. Now I don't want to don't want to keep having to save and run this. So Jest has a really nice function called watch. So -- watch. Hopefully that doesn't break with our port API issue. Holy moly, so we're getting a lot of things back here. All right, so what is all of this? This is the response that we've gotten back. All right. So we've got an issue with that port. That's annoying. Really got to find a way to close that. Okay. So somewhere inside this gigantic output, right, is the response that we're getting back with the body. Somewhere. Here it is. All right. Dot body. So let's see if we can get that. So what if we log out response res, see if that works. Okay, so the res is an option, all right? What about res.body? Just guessing here, seeing if it works. No, so it's not body. What have we got? So I'm just inspecting the information that we're getting back. Right? So res text. We just do Bruce. Maybe we'll try text. Here we go. So this is the text that we're getting back from this. So this is one way to approach this. However, if we look into this library, we'll actually see. Well, let's do the manual way first. All right, so we'll go const JSON equals JSON.parse log the JSON. So this JSON is coming back. That's correct. And then we can go through. We can say this is where the third sort of part to how we're working. Right. So we've got describe, we've got it, and then the third part is the expect. Right. So expect, we pass something in here. So for example, I can say expect 1 to equal 1. And now that should succeed. And if we say expect 1 equal 2, we would expect this one to fail. So what does this look like from a test output? Okay, expected, received. Sorry, received, expected. So expected 2, but we received 1. So that's how we can start to check. Now this is what we call a failed test. Right, this did not work. That is not the same as testing deliberate errors. Remember? Yeah, we want to deliberately fail and handle it. We want to expect it to fail in a recognizable fashion. Right? If you've got something that fails out here that you don't know what this is, right? You're really confused by this one because you're like, I don't know what this bug is. So what you'll do is you'll come through and then eventually, right? You'll update these circles to include this one, and this one turn into. You'll write a new test case, and he'll turn into something like this. This happens multiple times, right? right? For those who are working on Project CM, I always ask you guys to write your own test cases because you're essentially doing this. Right? As we come along, we're increasing the coverage, right? So that's the idea. As your code base expands, right? As the tree starts to grow, we want to increase the leaves that we're testing. So in this case, right, we want to test this JSON. So we say expect JSON. Now we've actually got quite a lot of options on this. If you go into the Jest API, we have a look at Jest.js. You have a look through all of the different things that they have. Where are we? Somewhere here. So they have a whole bunch of different expect options. Sure why that's not where it lives exactly. There we go. So look at all this. All of these different methods, and there's other plugins for it as well, just extended as a whole bunch more. So you can come through and really start to get very specific with how you want to handle the success and the failures of what you're doing. So to be null, right? For example, expect JSON not to be null. Chained two things together here, right? So you might say expect JSON, right, to have, I think one of them is have length. Right, to have length. In this case, we want to have, say, to have length. We want to import this, so users dot length, to make sure it's returning. Ensure it's returning all users. Really got to figure out that API issue. Okay, so that worked. All right, let's try and make it fail. Say have length of 4. What is this going to come back with? Okay, so we expected to have 4, we only received 2. In fact, it even tells us what we got. That's very, very helpful, right? So you might decide that it's 2, but then something else that you do in your API somewhere in your code breaks it, and it actually returns an extra one, or it filters one of them out. Your test will catch that, and it'll say, hey, something you've done isn't working anymore. That's why we test, because it's impossible to know. If I shake this tree down here, I have no idea what that's going to do to a branch out here. I have no way of knowing that. It's too complicated for a human being to go through all of these different steps for every single change that they make. Right? The human brain doesn't work that way. And if it does, then you're a genius. Right? That's why we write automated testing. Because we don't know how our code is going to affect other parts of our code. So
if we're a genius, we don't have to write any tests for our code.
Yeah, if you're a genius, let me know. You can run the webinar, and I'll just shut up. No, I think as a developer, you're I'm going to use a term that my mentor told me, which is your relationship between information. So when you first start out, you're here, right? And then as you start to expand, you start to grow. It's like, oh, I'm learning how to do an API, like set up an Express API. I know how to start one. Right, and then you start to become a little bit familiar with Node.js and how the command line works. And you come up to about here. And then this will be great. And then something will happen, and then whoop, crap, what the hell is this? Port taken. I don't know what that is. And then what you do, right, is you understand what this is. And once you understand it, you do a very important thing. You create a relationship between where you were and where you are. And so you know how to go back and forth between these two. Now, this is very analogous to how our brains work. Right? If you imagine this is a neuron, this is a neuron, right? So use a Tony Robbins analogy, what fires together wires together. Right? So that's going to create a relationship in your brain between this and this. And therefore, you can say that your relationship between these two pieces of information has increased. And the more this happens, the more you understand it until it becomes second nature to you. So as a developer and as code mentoring, as our community, what we try to do is instead of starting out here, right, and looking at all these different things, and this is the internet, and you're going, holy crap, I have no idea how any of this works. We start you down here, right, and we say, hey, let's introduce, we're gonna throw a curveball into the mix. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want you to create a relationship between these two pieces of information. Now, once that's strong, right, then we start to expand out into other things. We start to expand out into databases or other things. How do we handle the data? What are the different types of a database, and why does it fail, right? And over time, what you're doing as a developer is you're building up an intuitive map in your head of how all these different pieces of information relate to each other. Right? Now, to get a little bit, I know we're a little bit off topic, but it is very relevant to testing and how you think about testing and the process that you go through in problem solving. This is a very analogous to, you know, how I approach people and life and how different communities work together. You know, you have these people over here, right, and they've created their own relationships, but over here, right, these people operate differently. But then what happens when you get this person, right, you take him and you take this person and you put them together? What does this relationship look like, right? So you start to see the network. And this is one of the things that I think programming teaches us as students of programming, or students of complex networked systems, is I would actually challenge you guys to think about this outside the context of development. It's a really beautiful way. I use this for mental models. So how does the concept of a hyena in Africa and the ecology of Africa, how does this relate to macroeconomics, right? Are there similarities here that we can draw between these two things, right? We can say, if this is the hyena and his thing, and this is the macroeconomics, what's the relationship between these two? Can I come up with a strategy that somehow incorporates both? What if I incorporate a third one? What about Japanese Zen gardening? Right? What if I incorporate this? Now, this might sound stupid from a development perspective, right? It's like, how does this relate to my coding? But it really does, because your ability to take these very disparate pieces of information and see how they interact. This is the database. This is the API. This is the front end. Right? This is a successful application. Right? This is, I don't know what this is, right? Database and front end. This might be Firebase. Right? Maybe Firebase lives in here. For those who know Firebase, it's a direct interaction to the database from a front end. There's no API. Maybe this is your REST API, right? Right? So the interaction between your API and your database might be something like your SQLize. Right? For those who know SQLize, or your database ORM. All right, what's all of this? Well, all of this is your app. Successfully working app. Right, so you've got front end down here. Got your database here, your API over here. Right? So seeing how these pieces of information relate to each other is really critical, because you have a bug. And it's like, okay, where does this bug live? Right? Is it a front? Where's it showing up? Is it showing up in the API logs? Is it an API log issue? Right? And then is it a problem with the API itself, or does the bug say something like couldn't connect to the database? Right? So we know that it's an issue somehow linking the database and the API. So we know that if we study the relationship between the database and the API, we know that it probably lives somewhere inside SQLize. So we can start looking into how that works. And then as soon as we find this, and we find the bug, we create a new leaf on the tree to catch that bug and say, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. So looking at information and how things relate to each other really is the programming mindset, and it really is the testing mindset. So hopefully that wasn't too metaphorical or abstract for you guys. Hopefully that was actually a practical way of thinking about something. And again, I would challenge you guys to think about this outside your development. You know, you might have, like, the Japanese have this really beautiful thing. They talk about things that you enjoy. I'm not going to get this right, so I apologize if you know this framework. Things that you enjoy, things that you get paid for. Things that give you that help the world, right? They've got all these different things, right? So the things that you enjoy and that you get that help the world, right? This might be your job, right? Things that you get paid for and enjoy. This might be your hobby, right? And it's talking about, like, the intersection. I think there's actually 4 circles, and the intersection, I forget the exact thing, but this is like your true calling. Is this intersection of everything. This is a really beautiful way of creating relationships between information. Now, again, I know it sounds abstract or not related to development, but I promise you that thinking in this way will change your programming ability. It will change your conception of how you think about bugs and debugging and features. This actually is a way of engineering creativity. For example, if we said, think about how, I don't know, space travel relates to, I don't know, Hello Kitty. and creating, like, this might seem like a very strange interaction, but we could draw some connections between these guys and say, you know, is there somehow like a new marketing campaign where it's Hello Kitty goes to space? Like, that might be it sounds stupid, but it's maybe this example is. But if you're applying that to, crap, I don't know where the bug is, and you're doing this at a really fast speed, this allows you to find the bugs in your code. So I really challenge you to think about this in creative ways, right? Go and, like, after this webinar, go and write down a couple of different circles, right? Like this, and just put random things here, like, and create a relationship between, you know, bread. Start off with an easy one. Let's start with bread and milk, right? Again, I know it sounds silly, but this really is related to what we're talking about today with testing. So, you know, you might say this is like a pudding, right? The bread pudding. For those who've had it, it's really delicious, right? So you're creating a relationship here. You might say maybe breakfast. How are bread and milk related? But then we start to make it more abstract, right? Like, how is the feature of our user right? So we've got our user and their problem, right? What's the intersection of how the user is currently solving their problem? What is the problem, right? Maybe the problem is it's currently a paper system. Right? How are they currently solving the problem? Maybe your product sits in this space, right? Maybe to bring it back to testing, maybe it's a user, right? And the front end, right? What are all the ways that we expect our user to interact with the front end? Well, maybe we have the mobile app is one front end. Right? Maybe it's also maybe you have a desktop or a website, a web app. Right? Maybe for those who are fancy, you also have like a desktop client, right? And you're thinking about how, when you're building your testing and your APIs and whatnot, how are we going to interact with this, right? How is the user expecting to interact with the front end? And then you can bring that into the API, right? The API can say, all right, well, how do we expect the API to handle all of this, so that anything that the user interacts with on the front end is going through our API, right? Or maybe it's not. Maybe some of it is, but maybe some of it's stored offline. So, for example, Signal, or peer-to-peer. But this has an impact on how you engineer your APIs and your servers, because this is just going straight from the user to the front end and then back to the user again. But there's no API involved in this process. But then inside here, this is all of your standard stuff that we're focusing kind of like today, right? So then the question is, all right, well, how do I test peer-to-peer? So really thinking about these nodes and how these nodes interact. I know I've gotten very carried away on a bit of a tangent here, but it really does apply to what we're doing. So I'm going to open it up to questions and almost a bit of a break as well once we get a successful test here. Was any questions on anything I just covered there, or this process, this way of thinking? It really is quite fun when you try it. Hopefully it's useful. Cool. So let's actually get back to our code. So in this case, right, we want to, what's the intersection, right? So to use this metaphor, what's the intersection of what are we doing here and what are we testing? Well, the intersection is this stuff here. So as we saw, we want to have the length, the test of a length. What else do we want to test? We want to test the types, the data that's actually coming through. All right, so we want to say expect JSON, say 0, grab the 0 index. All right, to have, now let's go back to our React code. Right, we want to have a look at, see if there's a property. Right, to have property. So in this case, to have property, I say name and profession and age. Name, profession, and age. We want to test all this. Again, this is really looking at that intersection between, this is the API, right? And this is the test. What is the intersection? What are all the properties? So it's name, right, length of the thing, we've got age, we test the types of the data, so we'll test that. This is really looking, this is how you create tests. This is really looking at the interaction between these two. So we can see here it's not working. Start up. Okay. So that is kind of a successful test, right, should return the correct list of users. Now in this case, right, we might say expect JSON 0 to equal users 0. Let's see if this works. Okay, so that is working. So that is correct. And then the reason why I commented this out is because we might test this in a separate test case. We say it, right, should have age property. Right, so this is where you would test individual. There's so many ways to break this up, and how we think about testing each individual node of this tree. Sometimes you want to group them together like this. Sometimes you want to, and in our case, because I want to get like really focus on the basics, I'm going to make it pretty granular. But in reality, I'd probably do something like this, where I'd group them together. So move this back up here. Expect the correct length. And then have the main property, so grab him. Age there. Right, so expect this. We also expect .age to be number. So we don't want age to be a string. JSON, so we need to pull this in. So I don't necessarily want to pull this in. I don't want to repeat this each time. So what we can do is we can go JSON, so let JSON, and then we can do the before all. We're actually going to do it before each. For each. And before each one of these, we want to do this. What that will do is it means we don't have to do this each time now. We can expect that this JSON is already set up. And the same thing in here. This error that we got, JSON is not defined, that's now going to go away. We're doing that each time. Excuse me. Make that async. Okay, so to be a number is not a function. Right. So let's see if Jest has some number functions. So it doesn't look like it has a number. So I'm pretty sure Jest extended has this. To be a number. So look at all these extra things that we get if we use this plugin. We can check dates, we can check booleans, we can check numbers, odd, even, check ranges, we can check objects. There's all these different functions that we get from this. So I'd say this is a pretty good library for us to play with. So let's go ahead and install it. Jest-extended. Add dev just extended. So for this to work, create a little config file. So just.config.js, and simply just run setup files after env. This. .json. See if that works. So this is just config. This is saying set up this plugin. So you can actually have multiple in here. Multiple plugins. You can have other things. Actually write your own as well if you want to come up with your own test matches and things like that. I often do that for if I'm doing custom errors for my API. I'll come up with custom test matches to test those to make it really nice and easy to test. For now, just going to install this plugin. Okay, so let's see if that works. So hopefully now, right, this to be number, to be a number, be a number. Okay, let's try this. And there we go. So we've successfully tested the age property. Should have age property of type number. Right? We've tested a little leaf on this tree. So I'm not going to go through all the names and properties and whatever. You guys can extrapolate based on this. Right? But that shows you how to test an individual thing like that. So I'd say from a testing perspective, right, if we draw a new circle between this get users, right? So get users and the test, what we want to test, all the testing options. I'd say we've pretty much everything in this intersection we've pretty much covered from my perspective. We don't really need to test much more than this. We've got the length, that it's actually returning the right data. So we're checking equality, and we're also checking the properties. Now again, you can do your own thing where you list of users, or sorry, the list of properties. So I'd say from the intersection between these two, we're pretty safe. There's nothing that we've left out. Right? So your job as a test writer is to cover all of this area in between. Right. So to illustrate that point further, if I create a, say, intersection like this, and I go rectangle, do like a subtract. So this is your responsibility as a tester, is to test all of this. Now, in this case, right, if you haven't completed all of your tests, see how we've got this little section here. This little extra part is vulnerability. So something could happen that you haven't tested for, and it could cause a problem. So this is what test coverage does, is it tells you how much of the intersection between the test and the code have you covered. So this blue, this blue really is the how much you covered. We'll get into that a little bit later today. But for now, I'm going to do a little bit of a pause because we've got a successful test working. So yarn test, everything should work. All right. Got a bit of an issue with that API not closing, which we'll fix up a little later. But let's stop for probably 10 minutes. Come back at about 10 to 12. So go and get some water, do some stretches. For those who are the overachievers, go and do some circles, test your creativity. Really is quite a fun exercise. We'll come back at about 10 to 12. I'm going to go and get some water. Come back for questions.
Thanks, Tristan.
No worries. I'll also push this on GitHub as well. Successful test. Okay, I'll come back in just a second. All right. How we doing, team? I'm gonna come back and hang out for a second. How you guys doing? How you finding it so far? We all going to lunch? Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for coming, mate. If you're still here. Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure if.
Interesting, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sweet. Cool, cool. So sorry about those tangents. I think it was useful, but
yeah, I liked. I was actually looking up that Japanese concept you're talking about. Ikigai. I think Susie posted it. I was just Google searching it.
Yeah. Susie, is your background Japanese? Because your last name sounds very Japanese.
Akiyama,
yeah. yes, it is.
Great.
Me and Roger, by the way.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice. Yeah, Takashita. I love Japanese last names. They sound so satisfying to say. It's a very satisfying language to pronounce. I've always found like I spent a month in Japan and explored all over.
We can't forget good old Tomoya as well.
Tomoya, of course, Tomoya, yeah. It's just a very satisfying language to say. Yeah, it's very. I don't know. I like it. I like the way it feels.
So you spent.
So you were looking up the what's it called?
Say again. I was just asking about your trip.
Sorry, what were you
saying? There for a month in Japan?
Yeah, I spent a month in Japan. I went all over and explored many different parts. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. Beautiful people. Such an interesting culture.
It's on my list. I haven't been before, but it's on my list.
It looks so small on the map. You're like, oh, I could easily get through this, but it's just there's so much to see and understand about. Yeah. That's why I love traveling. I feel like I'd experience the same thing in China, and India as well. It's another one I really want to explore. But you were what's the name of those circles?
Ikigai. It's like
yes, Ikigai. Yeah, Ikigai. Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful concept. I was listening to a YouTube series the other day about it. Not about Ikigai, but about those circles. And this guy was saying that it's actually a way to literally change your brain's level of creativity. So he was saying you do this exercise where every day you draw these 2 circles or 3 if you want to really test yourself. And every day you just write down as many things as you can between how these 2 things interact. And you do this as much as possible. You do it for 5 minutes a day. And he said that your brain, after a while, will literally start to form new connections. Kind of like for those who have read up on how psilocybin or psychedelics affect your brain, that's quite literally what it's doing. Is it's reducing something called the default mode network in your brain, which is essentially the hardwired highways of your brain. It's reducing that. It's turning down the highways and saying, hey, let's go and explore the other parts of the city in your brain. Go and explore the back alleys and the rooftops and all that sort of stuff. And he said that after a while of doing this exercise, whenever he was presented with a creative problem, his brain just started throwing out all these random, interesting ways of approaching the problem that he never would have thought of before, because he'd practiced this process of trying to create relationships between information. And I think as programmers, that's what we do. We really start to see how the best programmers I know can can see the connection between 2 completely different things and instantly know where the problem is. that really is debugging, in a sense. So it's funny. Again, we often get into very philosophical conversations, but I feel like we're an analogist for so much stuff in life.
Yeah, that's something I'm gonna look at. This key guy. Yeah, it's quite
nice. Susie or anyone else who's like Japanese, is it part of Japanese culture? Is it a big thing, or like as Westerners we look at this stuff and go, oh, this is cool, it's Japanese, and we like label it as Japanese, but like I'm interested to know like how the Japanese perceive it. And same like meditation and Indian culture. It's like, oh, if you're Indian, you must meditate. It's like, no, like it's. I'm curious to know.
I don't really know. Sorry.
Yeah. Tomoya, is this something that
I don't know idea.
you've never? No idea.
No.
All right, maybe. Yeah.
Sandy posted on the chat a possible solution for closing the server.
Oh, great. Excellent.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the different types of testing. I heard about integration tests, end-to-end, and systems.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I heard about so many different types. Like,
yeah. So I'm just reading through this article. Yeah, there are so many, and I can probably draw some pictures for that. Because I think visually it will help. I'm just trying to find where they closed the API and what Sandy just sent. I can't see it. Can anybody else?
she posted it at 11:15.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. I can see the link. I'm going through it. Yeah, I'm trying to see.
If you scroll down, there's a using super test. And in there,
yes,
there's a done function that they put into the actual it clause.
I don't think that's.
So they're starting the server and getting JSON, and then inside the it clauses they have this done function, but that's something that we didn't do. I'm not sure what it does actually.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. Apart from that, I don't see anything that we didn't do.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have a quick look to see if there's something that I'm missing, because it seems like a very simple problem. Really annoys me how simple this is. It's annoying that Express doesn't provide a closing very easily. Yeah, I think we'll leave it for now. I think I like Susie's idea of getting into the differences between integration and unit testing, and we'll do some. I think we'll do some stuff around that as well. Yeah, we'll give it a couple of minutes and do that. Sounds good. Is there anything else you guys are interested in or want to cover? Or
I just had a question as well for testing in null cases. So, which is also like not everybody would put their age up, say, and that is okay to have the null value as well. So then, although you're testing integer, it could also be an empty case too. So.
So you mean like an or? Yeah. So I think there's just. Let me have a look to see. Two value types. Just googling it now. I'm wondering if I have. I think in the Jest extended, there's like a thing where you can pass in an array of possible types. And I think that might fix. No. 2BA. Maybe that's in Jest. 2BA. I've seen this before. I don't exactly remember. I think in the Just Extended, it offers an ability of object matching. Yeah, I'd have a look. I know it is possible, Sandy. I forget the exact syntax for that one. Just to be of type array. Object array or string. Okay, so you could do this. There's some answers in here, I think. Oh no, actually there's a library that solves this problem. Yeah, this seems to be a very heated question. If you follow that article, it seems to be that there's a 2B type. So this looks pretty good, Sandy. I'd say as that last link I just sent you. Forget that first one. That last link seems to be pretty good. I'll just share my screen so everyone else can see what I'm looking at. So this looks pretty good to be type. So if you install this as an extra little function, it even has resolves and promises, and that's pretty nice. Just I'm sure they'd have a null here as well. Hopefully that answers your question, Sandy. Okay, so before we jump back into hardcore testing, right? Susie asked a question around what's the difference between integration testing and unit testing and functional testing and end-to-end testing. Which one should you do? So I suppose and there's so many articles written about this, which I encourage you guys to read. I'm just going to do a bit of a brief synopsis, ranging from really, really specific all the way up to really global. So let's say we have a function function that's like add, takes two numbers, n1 and 2, and n1 plus n2. So functional testing, or unit testing, as is often called, this would comprise an individual unit. So what you would do for a unit test is you would just test this function. That's it. So you would test, say, 1 plus 1, and you would expect, or 1, 1. You pass that in, so you go like, it should correctly add numbers. And you would say, in this case, expect add 1, 1 to equal 2. Right? So this becomes your describe. This becomes your functional or your unit test unit add function. it should throw error, not number passed. So we should say if we pass in true and 1, we'd expect this to throw an error. Match. Expect. You can actually run some expect error to or error.message to equal number. Please pass a number. And we obviously haven't written that into our function, so this test would fail. That's kind of an example of a unit test. It's testing this individual unit. So is there any questions on specifically unit testing? We're going to do some other stuff in a second, but
Yes.
specifically, yeah.
So we just say it's like in React, you have a component and you'll be testing just one component.
Yep. So in, let's say it's JavaScript React. Let's say it's const user profile. The user profile will return, we're going to say a div class equal class name equals user profile. Right. You might have a button, logout. So what you would do in your testing, right, is there's a thing called enzyme. Right, so you can use enzyme.js with Jest. It works really well. So you can come in here and you can write React code. Inside React, so Jest enzyme. Some really nice patterns for this stuff. Allows you to get into React code. So your individual unit test would test this particular. To be honest, I find that components, because they're usually comprised of other components, they're not usually individual unit tests. They're usually some sort of integration test or a end-to-end test. But you can do, so for example, if I was doing a button, like a really basic atomic level component, I'd do testing on the button, and that would be unit testing. But then say something like a user profile, we're starting to get into a little bit more of integration testing. So let's say the button is a button. I'm not gonna just pretend this does other fancy stuff. Give me. And that this does some other stuff with icons and various other things, right? You'll come along and you'll do your button unit test. You'll do all that stuff here. Now the user profile uses this button. So this is what I would call a unit test. It's only working with this. It's not using other components. Or maybe it is, but it's very minimal. Maybe it's using a couple of icons. But the user profile, well, let's say this is a card. It's going to use a card element, right? Say it's got a button. It's got like a user image. And then we have like a pass in the name of that. ID equals user ID. Yeah, we get a whole bunch of different options, and this starts to become a very complicated component because it's comprised. Sorry about the background noise. It's using a whole bunch of other elements, right, from inside here. So the individual unit or the individual items, they get unit tested. That's kind of what I would call unit testing. And then this here, because it's combining the button and the user image and a few other things, and maybe it has like a use query, right, to do a few other things, and it's got like some dynamic stuff going on. This is what I would call an integration test, right? Because what you're doing is you're integrating a bunch of different components together. Now, some people, the purists, might say, oh yes, but it's an individual unit and it's not really looking at the relationship between how this talks to this and blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of the integration aspect. But from my perspective, from a UI perspective, this is what I would call an integration test, or kind of. And then the end-to-end testing is when you start looking at putting in data in the UI through something like Selenium or Puppeteer, and then you're actually testing in the database that the data that you put in the UI is in the database. So that's going from end to the end. So it's like right at the start all the way to the end at the end of it. So that really is kind of the process of end-to-end testing. So does that answer your question, Susie?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. That background noise isn't too loud, is it? I apologize for this. I can go somewhere else if needed. Cool. And my keys are falling off my keyboard, which is great. Okay, so that really is the different types. So you kind of got like this unit test. You've got integration test, which would test this guy. Then you've got your end-to-end. Some people, you might have heard of like the testing pyramid. Right, so testing pyramid is kind of how some people like to approach it. So the majority of their tests are at the unit level. So you're testing things like buttons and your cards and your user images. That makes up the majority of what you're doing. And then the integration is putting those things together. And then the smaller stuff is the end-to-end. So some people like this. It really comes down to how you want to approach testing. I don't know if I agree with this, personally. I think this is one of those examples where the IT community has kind of gotten very into its own world, where, you know, how many people are really running their like the enzyme and this stuff is very it's a very manufactured environment. It's not very close to what the user is actually going to be doing. The user is not looking at your button in the context of testing and running it through some faked browser. The user is running it in the browser. So I personally kind of have a little bit more of an opinion of flipping this on its head, and that actually the most important stuff is the end-to-end, and that doing, because that's the stuff that works. That is, the user is interacting with that. That's what you would expect to really that's the stuff that you're actually doing, as opposed to this abstract kind of thought. Now, I'm not saying that unit tests and integration tests aren't important. They are. They really are. But I personally have more emphasis on the end-to-end, because this is the stuff that's actually important for what you're doing. But as this graph mentions, it's slower and it's more expensive. Whereas this stuff, faster and cheaper, it's much easier to write a little button and test that little button than it is to set up a whole Selenium environment and a database and making sure that everything's going back and forth, and like that is much more complicated to do that stuff up here. But I think ultimately it's probably safer, because if it works up there, well, I mean, really, that's the only thing that matters, isn't it? So that's my slightly controversial take on the testing pyramid. You know, some people might hear this and go, "You're a complete idiot." Yeah, look, someone else has already flipped this around. Right? So I'm not the first person to think this. Here's another one. Inverting the test pyramid. So I'm sure this guy's advocating for focusing more on pretty much what we're doing. So yeah, you can go through and really experiment with what, you know, what you think is. This is an interesting one. You know, what you think is accurate. There's no, like everything in IT, there's not exactly a correct answer. It's more around how do you want to approach building software. There's also been talk of something called test-driven development, which is essentially what you do is you actually write all of your tests. So we would write for our API. We would let's do some test-driven development for our post, which we'll get back to. So I'll show you guys some test-driven development. What are some other buzzwords you guys need to know? Continuous integration. That's probably another important one. So I'll bring up Project CM. So continuous integration is this process where you're constantly deploying. You're not doing this waterfall approach where you build and you build and you build and you build and then you test and then you release. That's not really the approach to Agile. Agile is you build something, you test it, and then you release it immediately. And then it's these small little things. Now, to have that, it really helps to have what we call continuous integration, which is anytime anyone is contributing to the code base, everything's getting tested straight away. And then if the tests are passed and it gets approved, it gets merged straight in. It gets deployed straight away. So that's really this whole process behind continuous integration, always be shipping, Docker, all this process. So if you have a look, for example, we have 9 pull requests. I should probably get onto some of them. You know, people, for example, Susie, right? Susie's sent through this. Oh, actually, let's look at an API one because we're not testing the front end at the moment. We have a front end. Yeah, this one here, right? So Lee has sent through a pull request. Now, if we scroll down, we can actually see that GitHub is automatically doing some testing for us. So we've got some tests on the API. Now, continuous integration allows us to run all of this Jest. You'll see this is running this command here. This is Jest. This is all Jest stuff. So I can come along and see the output, the coverage. It also gives us the ability to run it on Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac. So we're actually running it in 3 completely different environments. So that's kind of how continuous integration and this process works. So any questions on how continuous integration applies to testing? I'm actually just going to make a trip upstairs. There's a bit of noise happening down here. So while you guys think about some questions.
So that's the pipeline you mentioned before, right?
Yeah, that's the pipeline. Oops, sorry, pull up headphones. That's the pipeline. It's essentially going from, you know, your PR all the way up to getting merged into development and eventually into deployment. So some companies actually have a whole setup where, because there's so many people, like for example Spotify or Google or one of these companies, there's quite literally so many people contributing to the code base that you know, they don't have time to integrate all of that. So what they do is they come up with systems where you know, it goes, if it gets merged in, and that's kind of what we're trying to set up. is you're moving away from these manual deploys, and if it gets merged in and it's been approved by somebody, like the team lead or something, then that actually goes all the way through the pipeline to deployment. And they have these complex systems where, you know, you might have microservices and each branch is deployed to a microservice, and it all gets very, that's a whole different world of what we call DevOps. But that is kind of the handover as a developer. Now, you might decide that that is something that you want to go into, and I've spoken about how the role of your development capabilities is actually increasing, and we need to be capable in that stuff. But that's another topic for another day. Really, for today's conversation, it's about what's that handover look like, and it really comes down to writing these tests and making sure they're all passing in CI. That's what I do in my day job, right? Like using Circle CI, the company. My company that I work for uses Circle instead of GitHub Actions. You've also got Jenkins. There's a whole bunch of them. And what that's essentially doing is going through all these tests and reporting on them and saying, hey, this one failed, this one worked, this one failed. And then that allows whoever's approving the PR to see what is broken. Remember, right? If you've got a very, very complex, imagine Google's code base. I think that they have everything in a single repo, and I think it's terabytes in size. And that's just the code is terabytes, right? That's not just pictures, and that's the actual code. So you can imagine to contribute to something that large, there's no way a human being, even if you're a genius, there's no way you can see the relationship of all these things. So having continuous integration allows other people to see what's working and what's not. So hopefully that answers your question. The internet in my room is a little bit spotty, so I apologize if it's cutting out. You guys can still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, sorry, my housemate was doing some stuff down there.
Christian, did you say that Jenkins is what shows the integration of all of those?
Yeah, that's another one. So we've got Jenkins, Circle CI or Jenkins. Oops, sorry, that's an ad. I just clicked on an ad. It's funny. So Jenkins is one. Right, I personally don't like Jenkins. This used to be the standard. It's now moved out. I wouldn't recommend this. GitHub doesn't use Jenkins. They use their own one, so I don't know why that's there. So GitHub Actions, I think, if you're starting out, is probably the most beginner-friendly. GitHub Actions have some really, like this UI is integrated into your code. It's really pretty. It's very informational. The way you set this up is very minimal. I would highly recommend looking into GitHub Actions. Another one is Travis. So Travis CI. If you see CI, what that stands for is continuous integration. That means is you're constantly, like I said before, you're constantly bringing code and merging it into the code base. So that's what continuous integration means. So Travis is another really nice one. So yeah, that's another one you might want to look into. But I mean, realistically, they're all doing the same thing. So, you know, take your pick, whichever one you like the most. I like GitHub Actions because it's integrated into GitHub really nicely. Yeah. So any other questions before we jump back into some more coding? Okay. So Lee has brought up something earlier today about something called test-driven development, TDD. Okay. So what is test-driven development? Well, in a perfect world, all of your business specifications and all of your designs are perfectly ready to go, and you can write your tests, or someone can write your tests, right? And then the programmer just has to write code that fits those tests, and that's it. And then you deploy it, and then it's perfect, and you don't have any bugs ever. That's the way all IT projects should work, right? If you're not detecting the sarcasm in my voice, I'm being sarcastic. I'm a little bit skeptical, personally, of test-driven development, because any software project is chaos. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean it in a technical sense. It's chaos in that there's lots of moving pieces, all moving around. The specifications changing left, right, and center because people are learning things as they go. So this whole idea behind like a really purist sense of test-driven development can be challenging, because the tester will come along and write all these cases, and then those cases, we find that that's not even needed. So I personally write tests after I've coded. I feel that that fits my development pattern personally. Other people are different, and they really do like to think about the end result before they write the code. I personally am a little bit more explorative, where I like to jump in, get a feel for it, get a sense of the problem, and then build a solution and then test the solution. But if you're at a bank, for example, then you have a very specific set of criteria that you need to follow. And in that case, it probably makes sense to do test-driven development. But it's a bit of a buzzword. I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone. It's a case-by-case basis. That said, what does it look like? Well, we're going to do some test-driven development for our post API. So our get is working. But what we want to do is we want to be able to create a user and get that user back. So let's try this. So we'll do a successful one first. So it should successfully create a user. Okay. So we would expect it. So we go request.post users. I think you do .send. We'll have some name. Age. Right. And then we would expect to get this back with some data. This as the data. We'll say maybe const user equals. To get back the user. So this is kind of how you would do a test-driven, right? This case, right? This is what we'd expect to get back. Let's do a failure. So try catch post, and we'll post something wrong. In this case, say expect the message to contain no name added. Okay. So we haven't written any code for this to happen. All we're doing is we're trying to define what we want our API to do. So the test is driving the development. It's driving how we approach it. I need this. So any questions on how we approached it from this angle? How test-driven development works? This is a very simple case because we've just kind of done it in the reverse order. But in larger projects, you'd really sit down and you'd think about all the different edge cases that you want to cover and write tests for those. I'm not a tester, like professionally. I do testing as a coder, but I'm not like a QA engineer. There are some people who that's their entire job, is to write tests. So they might have some better insight or teach it in a better way than I am today. But from my humble understandings, this is how you'd approach it. Cool. So what does this look like? Well, let's go ahead and actually do this. So have the post, have the user. So it's going to have the name and the age and profession equals request.body. Now, I'm going to go if no name, throw new error, or rather next, and next new error, and no, what do we say? No name provided. Name, age, and profession. Now, realistically, you'd use something like yup or some proper validation for this, but I'm just really exaggerating the process here. So users.push. Where is that module that I export to use? Yes, this make it a bit easier for us. Okay, so users.push. We want to create the name, age, and profession. So that's a new user. This, and then we also want to return that. New user equals. We can go response.send or JSON. New user. Okay, so that's pretty much the approach we want to take. So, right, we've created our code, we've created our test. Right now, we want to merge them together to create. Now, so this has already been, this relationship here has already been created for us. Right. As I mentioned, I don't personally go inward, start here, and then go out. I like to start with two different things and then put them together and see what is needed. Right? As opposed to starting here and then building out this stuff. But we've just done the opposite. So we've started with this, or in this case, we started with the blue. We've moved out to the red and the green. Okay, so let's try this. I'm going to go into my tests. I'm going to remove the skip. And let's try it. Okay, so we need a little async. You're kidding me. Did that work straight off the bat? No. Let's break this. I've just added an extra character in there to see if it should hopefully, yeah, okay, so it's not working. There's something wrong here. Okay. So I'm actually a little unfamiliar with super tests handling errors. So let's see what we're getting back. Log response.text. Let's just see what this is coming back with. A whole bunch of stuff. Cannot destructure property. Okay. I think we need to add body parser to Express. So we come into our API. And we go add body parser. And do app.use. I think that should do it. That's just going to allow us to accept data on the body. No name provided. Okay, great. The problem is this is coming back as HTML. So this is not helpful for us. So what we can do in Express is we can actually have a error handler at the end, app.use. Now in this case, we're going to take the error. App.use error. And say response.json. Response. Say if there's an error. Response.json. Message error. Yeah, I think that should error should always be there. So let's try this again. Not quite. Just Google this Express. I know you want to put it at the end of the pipeline. Just get the exact syntax for it. So we're passing the next error like this. And then where does that live? Okay. Maybe it takes. Hopefully this works. I don't think it counts the parameters, but yeah, okay, it does. So it was actually just checking the number. So somehow Express internally is going, how many does this have? How many parameters does this function have? And if it's more than 3, then the error is the first one. It's a bit strange. I don't personally like that format, but that is what it is. So great. So now we're getting this error, and we also need to return a response error message as well. So we're status. We'll set this to say 400. Let's do that on the actual code. Response.json next. Return next. Response.status. Who knows the code for a bad request? Anybody know? This is your HTTP code.
400.
400. That is correct. 400. Okay. Try it again. Okay, so looks like, let's have a look. So this is still coming back as successful. Now we don't exactly want this. So let's have a look in super test. We handle errors. See if they have a nice utility function for us. Actually, no, we already know how to do this. Right, so expect this to come back with a message of no name provided. Don't need this try catch. Super test handles it a little differently, and we're expecting the status be 400. Let's see if this works. And there you go. So let's try and change it to something like 200. Make sure it's really working. Yep, so that's working. And then let's change the name of the error to see if that's working. There you go. So that is how you successfully would do a test-driven development. As we looked at creating a user and getting a user back, and we looked at should fail. So it should rename this. Should fail and not providing a name. Now you could go through and also do this for all the other required properties. All right. So in this case, we can actually loop over it. We can say name, age, profession, for each. Put it in here. Jest actually has its own way of handling this. You can do like an it dot. There's a fancy way to do it, but I'm not going to confuse you guys today. Just going to do something simple like this. For each is fine. Replace this when not providing a key. Key. What that's going to do is loop over each of these name, age, and profession, and make sure that it's going to fail on each one. And what we can do is also create a successful user. User, name, age, profession. Here. And we can delete user key. We're going to delete whatever key we're currently on. Just so we know that it's testing the exact thing. Everything else is correct except the one that we're testing. That's kind of what you want to get to. Because the foo bar, that's completely different. Whereas we want to test like everything else should be the same and perfect except the one thing that we're looking for. Right? So remove required field. That way, it's reducing the amount of errors you might get in your tests. Let's see if this works. And there you go. Creates a user, should fail when not providing a name, age, and a profession. And I'd say that's, from a testing perspective, that's pretty much all we're going to cover today. Writing tests. There's one more topic that I wanted to discuss with you guys, and that's this blue object here. If you remember, this is called the coverage. Right? How much of your code has been covered by your tests? That's really what this blue thing is. So, how do we do that? Well, thankfully, Jest makes it really easy for us. close these files down. So we can do this very simply by simply just running yarn test -- coverage. Literally all we have to do. So you see here how it's created this document here and this new folder. Look, I'm going to add that to git ignore. So if you open up this and you open up this folder,
Jest, this coverage.
Yep, this is part of. Yep. Okay. There are other frameworks that have it too. As I mentioned, Jest is a combination of many different things. So we have this. If you open up this report and you go to this index.html file, look at this. So this is kind of like the dashboard that illustrates this blue part here, this concept. How much of your entire application has been covered in tests? It's very powerful. So we can come in. If I click on a folder, I go into index.js, you can see that most of it, that's pretty good test coverage. It's about 90%, 92%. Right? We've covered 13 out of 14 of the statements, and we've gone through 4 out of 5 of the branches of our tree. It even uses the same methodology, branches. So this is actually testing all the branches of your tree, which is really cool. And it also tests lines as well and functions. So if we click on this file, we can see that this is the one little bit that we haven't tested. It says, hover over this, right, if path not taken. So because this is not really important to what we're doing with testing, I'd say we can leave that for now. Let me create a problem. I'm going to, in our tests, I'm going to skip the users. Regenerate the test coverage. Okay, so now if we go back to all files, it's not as green as it was before. So we've only covered 8 out of 21 of the statements inside routes, right? We haven't covered any of the branches, and we've only covered half of the functions. So this is not great. Let's look into this. So we go into users. So you can see here, look, let's break down how we read this file. All right, so 38% of the statements are done, 8 out of 21. A statement is this here is a statement. Now, the coverage report actually tells you how many times that has been run, only in the test. So this has happened twice, which means there's probably 2 cases in which we have returned the users. So let's go to our test, our get test, and you can see number 1 and number 2. That's the reason why that's been run twice. So this gives you a nice illustration onto how many times something's been run. Now this hasn't been run at all in our test. So function, it says function not covered. Right, statement not covered. All this has not happened, and that's because we took it out. So in the test, we skipped it. So let's add that back in. And refresh. Boom. So look, we've got a couple of problems here, right? This down here has not been covered yet. Statement not covered. So what that means is this might not be being tested somehow. So the question is like, there's a little bit on this, to use this metaphor, there's a little bit here that we haven't tested yet. So the question is, how do we create a test to test this individual part? So I thought we already had with this successful creation. I don't know why that's deciding that it's not doing that. I think for now, for what we're doing, this is pretty good because we've already done the end-to-end test, right? In that we're sending something, we're getting something back. So this part here is actually correct. For some reason, it's not covered in code coverage. I don't know why. Now, this might be a situation where you decide, you know what, I'm happy with this result. Or you might decide, actually, I want 100% coverage. So you'll try and find a way to find out how to get this in the test. But overall, we're sitting at a pretty high 92% of our statements. Overall, 88, 100% of functions, 91% of lines. I'd say that's pretty much good to go. Especially because we tested it manually. And that's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to show you guys today. So I'm going to add this onto GitHub. Finish all this. I'm sorry about this bug. I really don't know where or why that's happening. I don't think it's valuable for me to look into that right now. If you want me to, I can, but I'll leave that up to you guys if you want to fix that up. I'll leave the comments in here for you around that. So feature added, what do we do? Added the post user. Okay, there you go. So that concludes our webinar for today. As always, I'm going to hand that over to questions, social time, hanging out. Thanks for those on YouTube. Thanks for watching. I'll join you next week. So Marcy asks, is there a way to say must test on some important part so that if it's not in the covered percentage, it will get flagged or something? Unfortunately, what does must test mean? The computer doesn't know how to interpret that. We have to write that test. So if your tests that you're writing aren't covering that, then there's something wrong with your tests. So that unfortunately that concept doesn't exist. Maybe when we have artificial intelligence at a decent enough level to say, hey, can you please test this part of the REST API, maybe it can interpret that for us. I'm just thinking that the percentage evaluation treats all parts as equally important. Yes, it does, and there are some options, I think, to, like, say, disable tests for files. I don't know if there's like inline comments where you can say don't test this or ignore this from coverage. There might be. I haven't looked into that, but that would be interesting.
I think even if you're doing that, you're kind of you're changing your production code.
Yeah.
You're adding some production code that's going to get built, put on your production server, and it's what you're adding is to do with testing. But testing should be separate. Testing is just in development, you know.
Yeah.
So you want to keep it separate from your production code.
Mm-hmm.
So like putting in some sort of annotations or whatever on production code, which is to do with testing. I don't know. I wouldn't really take that approach anyway. Could be possible, but
it depends. It depends if you're building it from TypeScript and removing comments, and there's a whole bunch of factors in that. Yeah, that's a good question, Marcy. Yeah. What other questions have we got? Well, you're all testing experts now. I love it.